In addition to being able to configure a single device off of the device in BACnet, you also have the ability to go to the actual IntelliTASC service and configure an entire network. So we're going to have a look at that now. And while we're having a look at that, we will take a look at the properties of the service itself. For the purpose of this exercise, we're going to try and configure several 6100 VAVs at once. Now, obviously, we could go into each of the 6100 VAVs, right-click and do configure graphics, and that would work just fine. However, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to go up to the ASI IntelliTASC service. We're going to right-click there. We're going to click on the actions, and we're going to do configure graphics here. And when we do that, what's going to happen is all of the ASI equipment that's in the BACnet driver will be configured at once. So let's try this. Here we go. And we hit true, and we hit configure. Now, when we were doing just one device, this worked pretty fast. However, now that we're doing 6 devices, it's going to take longer. You can see in the application director that it is working through the devices. And obviously, if you had a large network where you were doing dozens of devices, you could do it and you could configure them all at once. But it would probably take several minutes for the configuration action to complete. So just a little bit of patience required depending on the size of your network, but it pays you back tenfold, because when you go into the devices now that they've finished configuring, you will see that they all have graphics and they will set up nicely for configuration.
So let's dive deeper into the IntelliTASC service itself. What we have inside of the properties of the service are the ability to manipulate a few options that we have within the service. So the first one that we can manipulate is self-explanatory. The enabled will allow you to disable the service if you feel the need to do so. If you disable the service, then if you right click on any of the devices, you'll see that the actions are no longer available. So that's simple enough. But the next one, resetting station PX views, requires an explanation by way of an example. Now by default, reset station PX views is set to true. What this means is that when we're looking at a station PX view, we can at any time go into a PX view and edit it and change it. We don't prevent you from doing that. So this is the PX view we have here, for example, for this device, and I might move things around and put it over here and hit save. And when I have a look at it, I realize that perhaps I really didn't want to do that. And so now I have a new graphic. If I wanted the original graphic back, it's as easy as just hitting the actions and just configuring the graphics again. And what that's going to do is bring back the default graphic for this particular device. So just double click over here and you'll see that we're back to the original. Now what you do sometimes want to do is you actually do want to make a change and you want to make it permanent, and there's a danger when you're using the IntelliTASC services that you'll overwrite the changes that you made. So let's say you do want to move this and you want to put the flow here for some reason and you want to keep it that way. What you have to realize now is that every time you run the IntelliTASC service, as you've just seen, you're going to lose those changes. So one way to prevent yourself from losing those changes is just to go into the reset station PX views and set it to false. Now what will happen is if we do run the action over here, then when we look at the graphics, we'll see that even though we ran the action and we did a reconfiguration, it maintained the graphic that you wished to keep. The next feature on the list is the enable air balance feature, and we'll get to that in a bit. Let's just discuss the ignore disabled devices first, and by default this is set to false. Now when you look at a BACnet network, some devices may actually be disabled in the network, and by default when we have this set to false on that setting, then when we run configuration we will actually configure the disabled devices as well. Now, you could go in here and you could set the ignore disabled devices to true. And what that would mean is that when we run the configuration here, in this example, that first device will not get configured. We'll only configure the last 5 devices. Now, this can be useful in an application where you have a whole network of devices and you have certain devices you would not like to configure when this configuration action runs. You can simply disable those devices here and then make sure that the ignore disabled devices is set to true in the service itself. Now, just a couple of comments about the last few parameters on this list. The direct transfer parameterization has to do with the communications of the configuration data, and I do not recommend that anybody actually touches this without being asked to do so by technical support. It's best that we leave these parameters alone. They're only there for very unique situations. And then finally, the version number, again, probably only useful when you're actually requiring technical support. We may need to ask you which version of the IntelliTASC service you have.